Okay, so the BC court system, they want you to know it. I think probably just in case you get sued. I don't know. So we have 4 different levels in our BC court system. Small claims is the little guy on the totem pole. It's kind of the first stop. That's how we think of it. And the Supreme Court of Canada is the big one, right? It's the big gun. So small claims is the only one that has some limitations on it. So it has a monetary limitation of $35,000. So if you're thinking it was 25, they just upped it a little while ago. It's now 35,000, and I think they probably should have gone a little higher, but that's just my opinion. There's also a territorial restriction, so it is limited to where the defendant lives or where the claim arose. So if these guys that had the goat stealing situation going on there, if they lived in Delta, then you could say, well, it's limited to where the defendant lives. So you live in Delta, so that's an option, or where the claim arose. Where did the goats get stolen? In this case, in Delta, so Delta is the only option. But if you live in different cities, or the defendant moves somewhere else, and so if you moved and then you schemed and you came back to Delta after 2 years to steal his goats, then the option would be where the goat stealing happened in Delta or where the defendant might be living now. So if he'd moved to Richmond, there would be 2 choices. Now, if you were starting the action, if you were actually going to sue, where would you choose, if you had a choice of the city you live in or the city he lives in, where would you choose to do it? The city you live in, yeah. So unfortunately, if you get your car broken into in Prince George and the person lives in Enderby, your choices are Prince George or Enderby if you live in the Lower Mainland, which kind of sucks if you're starting a claim, yeah. So that's the small claims first stop, those 2 limitations, you need to remember that. So if you went to small claims and the judge said he had to pay you money for your goats, would you be happy with that? No, he's trying to get the goats back, so he's going to appeal. The next stop is the Supreme Court of BC. So the Supreme Court of BC onward, none of these have any monetary or territorial restrictions. There are sort of special characteristics about each one though. So for the Supreme Court, they have an option. They can either just look over the documents that they got from the small claims case and see what they think of how the law was upheld to see whether they'll let it stand or overturn it. Or they may bring everybody in, get an entirely new trial and hear all the testimonies and look over all of the evidence fresh. Okay, so they have that option to choose between those 2. So if you're not happy, the Supreme Court of BC says, sorry, the decision stands. We're not going to overturn it. It's still money for your remedy. You're not happy with that, you keep going to the BC Court of Appeal. So the BC Court of Appeal is special in the fact that they will never rehear. They'll never order a whole new trial. They will just go back through all of the prior documents and look to see whether the legal principles were upheld. Okay? To see whether they're going to let it stand or overturn it. Yeah, you can't. If your claim is bigger than the 35,000, you can't start at small claims. Yeah. For small claims? You know what? I don't even know the answer to that. So the question was, will all of these deal with common, equitable, and statute? My guess is yes, but I don't know that for sure because I'm not a lawyer. They don't ask you. No, you don't have to worry. I mean, if I don't know it and I'm the teacher, you're pretty safe, right? It's great on video. Okay, so BC Court of Appeal, if you're not happy, right, they're gonna let the decision stand. They're not gonna overturn it. Are you gonna keep going? He loves his goats a lot because he's got money to burn. It's like 60 grand just to submit your documents for an appeal to Supreme Court. It's crazy expensive. So the Supreme Court of Canada, the special thing about them is that they will also, just like the Court of Appeal, they will not rehear. They'll not order a whole new trial. They will just look over the previous documents from all of the other levels of courts. The other thing is they don't even have to give you the time of day. They're not even required to hear all of the appeals that they get. So if you think about it, There are a bunch of different BC Courts of Appeal. There's only one Supreme Court of Canada. So they've only got so much time in a day, in a year, right, to hear the cases. The cases that do you think they're going to be concerned with goat stealing between neighbors? Hopefully not, right? If they do, we've got big problems going on. So if you get a case that they're going to consider to hear to look at all of the evidence and to sort of take care of as an appeal case, this is a big deal. It's a case that's a big deal. Usually it's stuff that is of serious nature, or it's stuff that might set a precedent for the next 50, 60, 100 to 150 years. So you get stuff like, privacy issues where we didn't have privacy laws, right? You might get that kind of thing happening here, right? Some Facebook's privacy stuff between employer and employees that a little while ago had gone to the Supreme Court of Canada, because they know that once the case goes through these levels, if the decision is made and it stands, that sets the precedent now, because like we know, the judge has to go back to a previous case in order to base their decision. So so the serious stuff, the high gravity stuff will be in the Supreme Court. So I'm sorry they didn't want to even look at your goat stealing case. So it died here at the end of the BC Court of Appeal. Okay, so you guys need to know that. You need to know what order. You need to know how they sort of fall, what order you'd go through that in. How do you do that? You remember a Supreme sandwich, and you remember that the Supremes do not like one another. So if you actually know the musical group, the Supremes, there's rumors that they really did not get along. They hated one another. They just performed, and then they went their separate ways. If you don't know who the Supremes are, Google it, okay? Supremes don't want to touch, so we all know that small claims is sort of the first stop. It's the little guy, and we know that the Supreme Court of Canada is the big kahuna. So as soon as you know that, the starting and the ending, you know exactly how these have to go, because if you flip these the other way, the two Supremes would be touching one another, and that's bad. Okay, they don't want to do that. Does that make sense? Okay, if you've got an acronym or some other way to remember it that you think is better than that, by all means, I'm all for it. Just find a way to remember. So what is the highest court in Canada? Supreme Court of Canada. What's the highest court in BC? BC Court of Appeal. BC Court of Appeal is the highest court in BC, and Supreme Court of Canada is the highest court in Canada. So if you go back, this is sort of the hierarchy. This one is got seniority over that, the Supreme Court of BC.